Alright, we're starting with the main shape of the penguin, starting from the beak, drawing the top, and then drawing the belly. A little tail. Now, let's create a clipping mask. Let's pick a dark color and draw a line crossing the body, following the curve, starting from the chest and ending in the tail. Now you want to close the shape and fill it in. Now let's add some shading, so new layer, texture brush. I'm using paper, one of my own texture brushes, and adding some shadow. I'm using two different colors here. Gently adding shadows at the bottom of the belly. Now since we're working in a snowy environment, I'm adding a little reflected light at the bottom of the belly that reflects the light that comes from the snow. I'm also doing it in the tail. Now we want to draw the beak, so let's pick an orange, outlining the form of the beak, closing the shape and filling it in. Let's add a clipping mask, add some shading. And now I'm gonna use the eraser just to separate between the upper part of the beak to the bottom part. Let's also add some red tones. There we go. Little reflected light. Cool, now we want to draw the legs, so I'm adding a new layer and drawing that part where the leg connects with the body. Just a white shape. And now I'm gonna use the eraser to merge it with the body. Turning on the alpha lock and adding some shading. Now let's add another layer at the bottom of the list for the other leg. Now this leg is actually behind everything else, so there's going to be a strong shadow on it because the body actually blocks the light from going to that leg. Let's create another layer to draw the actual legs. Using orange, the same orange of the beak, drawing some thin lines. Let's turn on the alpha lock and add some red with the texture brush. And a little reflected light. And now we can draw the shoes. I'm gonna go for red and just outline the shape of the shoe. I'm trying to pay attention to the angle of the shoe, like how it connects to the ground and to the leg. Cool, let's add some details. Let's draw the sole using white. Now let's add that steel thing of the skin shoes. I'm not sure what's the name of it. If anyone knows, just let me know in the comments or something. Using the eraser to make it sharper at the edges. Turning on the alpha lock, and now I want to add some reflections just to make it look more like steel. Just little reflections. Another layer below, and now let's add some lines to connect the shoe with the steel. Now we want to add some shading, so starting with the white sole and adding some shading. Now let's also add some detail on the red part. Something like this. And shading as well. I think we're done with the legs, so let's work on the hands of the penguin, drawing one little wing with slightly brighter color. Now let's use the eraser with the texture brush. Let's turn on alpha lock, add some bright color, and a little reflected light. I'm merging all the layers of the legs just to clean up the mess, and drawing the other wing below everything. Alpha lock, let's add some shadows. Cool. Now let's work on the face a little bit. Let's add a little hole for the nose and let's do the eye. Doing a perfect circle. Let's turn on the alpha lock and try to add a little bit of shadow. There we go. Now let's create a new layer and work on the hat. Starting with white, just creating the wool part of the hat. Adding tiny little dots to make the texture. And I think we need to transform it a bit to make it fit the head. Creating one more layer, drawing the red part of the hat. You can notice that I actually stretch the hat to the right part of the canvas just to emphasize the movement in the composition. That's how you make the effect of speed in drawings, make it look more dynamic. Now I'm creating the wool bar of the hat with the same dots technique. To shade the wool, I'm using textile, one of my texture brushes. It just works well with the dots, make it look like real wool. Using two types of colors and reflected light as well. Now let's add a clipping mask for the red part of the hat and choose the jumper texture brush. Let's pick a dark red and add some shadow. Let's go even darker here. Now I'm going to invert the texture of the brush because I want to add the highlights and not the shadows. Also a bright red at the top. Now let's add a little detail with a thin line that goes across the hat. For the scarf, I'm starting with the part that actually wraps the neck, making sure the lines are curved so it will actually look like it wraps the neck. Using the jumper texture brush, inverting it back and adding some shadow. Inverting the texture again for the highlight. And now let's create another layer, drag it below everything. And just drawing two free curvy lines following each other. See how the scarf is waving to the right part, emphasizing the movement of the penguin. Let's work on the shadows, add a clipping mask, get the texture brush, and add a shadow only on the right side of each fold. Because of the folds, some parts of the scarf actually face upwards to the light, but some of them face downwards. That's why I'm adding shadows only to the bottom parts and using the eraser to sharpen those edges. This part, for example, faces down, so it should be darker than the others. Let's invert the texture and add highlights to the sides that faces upwards. Now a tiny bit of reflected light, just to make it look a bit more crispy. And now I want to use a bright red just to go over the edges of the scarf to add a bit of depth and volume to it. Alright, we're almost done, so let's work on the background a bit. I'm using my paper texture brush, just adding some light at the bottom. We want to create the effect that the snow is glowing, so let's use white. Now let's create another layer, and I want to try to create the effect of some mist that goes after the shoe. Just like some dust maybe, something that emphasizes the movement. Let's use alpha lock on that shape and paint some bright tones in it. Let's use the eraser and make it less noticeable. Now let's add some ice particles, just snow that goes away. These are the tiny little details that add some magic. Cool, now let's add one more layer and add some snowflakes. Trying to use different colors, different sizes of snowflakes and different shapes. Now I want to add a little indication for the horizon line. Let's use a layer with low opacity and just draw a line at the background, cutting the canvas. Let's also warm it up a bit. Let's get one of those red tones and just add some red. Yeah, and I think that's it. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please hit the like button if you did and let me know in the comments what you think.